I haven't done this in a while. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to hell. But actually, we're probably going to try to have fun with this one, or at least be entertained with this one, and not into the usual drearing, glaring doom and gloom that we usually are, stuck in. With that said, we're going to be watching some MrBallen. What very funny, right? If y'all haven't seen the story on my channel that I actually was there for, right? Crazy how small the world is. MrBallen, right? When he was a Navy SEAL, and myself, when I was in the Army, were operating in the same exact AO at the same exact time. Ain't that crazy? It's nuts, right? People think the military is this big, giant machine, which it is, but it's actually not that big. If you look at the numbers comparatively, it's not that big. That being said, let's jump in.
Today's story is about a disturbing discovery made in Brazil in the 1980s. Now, at the time, the Brazilian government attempted to hide this story, saying it was just too sensitive for the public to know about it. But eventually, photos of this discovery were leaked, and it sent Brazil into a panic. Now, I'm not going to show you any of the actual leaked photographs because they're just too graphic, but I will be describing them in some detail towards the end of this video, so viewer discretion is advised. But before we get into that story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, please offer the like button a can of soda, but be sure you secretly, violently shake it before you hand it over. Also, please subscribe.
Oh, that's such a jack move. That's such a jack move. God, people are so obviously just... People just hate the like button with a passion, apparently. Okay, I'm back before I started up my own laughing storm. Let's go.
Subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads.
Apologies, everyone. Okay, I really love MrBallen's intro. I do, but I get in trouble when I play it. It's not fair. MrBallen, please. All right, fix this at some point. But yeah, YouTube hates it when I'm playing his intro. This sucks. Exposed. Oh, this is like stories back to back. All right, let's go.
On the afternoon of September 29th, 1988, a 10-year-old boy named Francisco was walking along the perimeter of a man-made lake in southern Brazil while poking the ground with his stick. Francisco was doing one of his favorite after-school activities, which was looking for bugs. And this lake, which was a part of the Billings Reservoir in the Brazilian state of Sao Paulo, was his favorite place to do that. And the reservoir was gigantic, but it was not shaped like a typical circular lake. Instead, it was more like a big river that kind of wound around and had all these skinny branches kind of jutting off the sides of it. And on this particular day, Francisco was walking along one of those skinny offshoots of this lake, where at certain points, if Francisco wanted to, he could literally swim to the other side of the lake in a matter of minutes. Now, Francisco knew he was not really supposed to be anywhere near this reservoir, because in recent years, gangs from the nearby cities would bring their murder victims out to this reservoir and bury them here. And so locals knew it was not a safe place and to stay clear.
Oh, brother. Well, then again, I mean, it's tough. And the gangs only exist in those areas because the people do nothing about them. Inaction, right, against evil is still evil. So if you stand by and you do nothing, you're choosing evil. People want to say, oh, I'll just be neutral. Everything sucks. Well, if you don't pick a side, the sides will pick you. So you're going to be a target or an ally. There is nowhere else to be. And everyone's like, well, don't deal in absolutes. Reality deals in basically absolutes all the way up and down. Let's go.
But Francisco, he didn't listen to any of that because he loved walking around this lake and looking for bugs. And so he thought, you know what? No one's harmed me yet, so what's the big deal? And so, as Francisco casually walked along, poking at the mud, looking for his bugs, he finally saw one. It was a huge water scorpion, almost 2 inches long, and so immediately Francisco, without taking his eyes off the bug, drops his backpack, grabs a clear container that he kept in the side pocket, he opened it up, he bent down, and he scooped up this water scorpion and capped it, and then he brought the container up and looked inside to kind of admire his new pet. And as he was staring at this container, he noticed something odd on the other side of the lake. He basically saw it through the plastic container, and so he lowered the container to get a better look at this strange thing on the other side of the water, and what he saw was this big group of vultures, all kind of standing in a circle right on the water's edge. And immediately, Francisco was way more interested in these vultures than in his bug, because vultures meant there had to be a dead thing nearby, because vultures are scavengers. And so whatever they were circled around was probably a dead animal. But Francisco, he looked around and realized there was no way to get to the other side of the water to see whatever this dead thing was unless he swam. And he knew if he went back home with soaking wet clothes, his mom would know he had snuck to the reservoir and he'd be in lots of trouble. And so, feeling really frustrated, Francisco just picked up a rock and chucked it to the other side, trying to splash the water near the vultures to get them to fly away so he could see the dead thing. But the first rock he threw did not really have an effect. The vultures just kind of turned around and looked at him and then went back to whatever was on the ground.
Bob, don't mess with big birds. Ever. Just don't mess with big birds. That's something that a lot more people need to be aware of. Don't mess with big birds. Just look up birds attacking human. That's all you gotta do. You'll see. You'll see. All right. And big birds can actually be a direct threat to children. I bet a lot of people didn't know this. They can be a lethal, mortal threat to children. I mean, anyway, don't believe me. Do your own research. Good luck. But Bub, like, these birds, dude. All right, let's go.
And so Francisco gathered a big pile of like 25 rocks and began throwing them one after the other at these vultures. And finally, Francisco had caused enough chaos on the other side of the water that the vultures got upset and they took to the air and they flew away. And finally,
lucky, they could have easily been like, you know, like that. What was it? Jurassic Park 3, where like the pterosaur or pterodactyl, I think, it just like slow turns and looks at them. That's what I was expecting here, right? If you don't know what I'm talking about, look up Jurassic Park 3 pterodactyl scene or whatever, or pterosaur scene. It's one of the two. It's either pterosaur or pterodactyl. I could be wrong, though. Look this up for yourself. Anyway, let's keep going.
Francisco got a clear view of the dead thing that was in the middle of the circle of vultures. Now, initially, Francisco thought this dead thing was going to be maybe a bird or some other small animal from the area, but when he got a good look at this dead thing from 30 feet away, it didn't look like either of those things. It didn't have fur, it didn't have feathers, it actually looked kind of pale, almost like a pig. But Francisco's thinking to himself, why would a pig be all the way out here? And then it slowly dawned on Francisco that what he was looking at was actually a dead person. Suddenly terrified, Francisco scooped up his things, turned around, and ran to the nearest village where he began screaming for help. Within a few hours, the area along the water where the vultures had been and where this body was swarming with police and also with curious villagers. Normally, when a body was discovered in or near this reservoir, which unfortunately happened quite a bit because of all the recent gang violence, police would often break ranks from the investigation and walk over to the local onlookers and kind of fill them in and tell them, who this person was and what they think happened. But this time, it was totally different. The police were totally secretive, and it was really obvious. The police immediately roped off the entire area with crime scene tape, and then the police officers stood in a circle, shoulder to shoulder, blocking the view of the villagers so they couldn't see the body. And then when villagers actually walked up to police and said, "Hey, can you tell us what's going on?" the police would say they couldn't talk about it, and then they would tell the villagers to back up and stay away.
Corruption? Can you say corruption much? Yeah, something really corrupt's going on here. Not to mention, well, if you have one bad cop and 9 good cops, you have 10 bad cops. That's how the equation works. And that, however, applies to everybody. If you have one good person, right, and 10 bad people, well, you have 10 bad people. Well, no, I messed that up. If you have like, one bad person and 9 good people, you have 10 bad people, essentially. Actually, that applies in the reverse as well, right? Because if you're one good person among 9 bad people, you have 10 bad people still. That's just the facts. It's irrefutable. Inaction is evil. Let's go.
Locals would stick around for a while, being treated this way the entire time by police, and then finally, when the sun started to go down and it was clear the police were very committed to hiding what was going on, whoever was still there finally just left, figuring when they got home, they could just turn on the news and see what had happened with this dead person. But when they got home and turned on their TV, there was not one news story about this body. And at a minimum, this story should have dominated local news, but it somehow was not being talked about. And then even stranger was the next morning when locals got up, they headed back to the reservoir to see what the police were up to. And when they got there, they found the police were gone, the body was gone, and there was absolutely no trace that anyone or anything had ever been there. It was like it had been totally sanitized. For days, locals in this area continued to check the TV news, they checked the radio, the newspapers for some story, some bit of information about this dead body that was found. But again, there was just absolutely nothing, and it just made no sense. Why wasn't anyone talking about this? And so eventually, in the absence of any official information about what happened, a rumor began to circulate among locals that the body belonged to a local fisherman who had gone missing 3 days before Francisco discovered him. And this fisherman, apparently he was an alcoholic, and he had gone to the reservoir, and he had begun drinking, and apparently he drank so much that it killed him. Now, many people wondered, if this drunk fisherman story was the real story, then why were the police so secretive about the body, and why weren't they willing to give up any
Let's continue.
information to the crowd about what had happened to this guy? I mean, a drunk fisherman is not a super sensitive thing. It just seemed like that doesn't line up with the police's behavior. But questions like these remained unanswered, and after several weeks of still no new information, no news coverage anywhere, even the most skeptical of villagers who really thought there's something weird going on here, they just kind of forgot about it and moved on. Until 6 years later, in 1994, when someone, we don't know who, from the Brazilian government decided they just couldn't keep the secret any longer. And so they gathered up some photos and an autopsy report they were not supposed to have, and they smuggled those things to the media. And once the media published these things, it became immediately clear that the dead man who was found in the reservoir in 1988 was not a drunk fisherman who drank himself to death, nor was he the victim of gang violence. Instead, it appeared that this person's death could potentially be paranormal. If you're a fan of the strange...
Okay. That'll be interesting to see. Give me a sec.
Dark and...
Apologies. If I show certain parts of this thing, then... yeah, I get in trouble. Alright. Let's continue.
episode called Without a Trace.
The northwestern state of Alaska remains.
Okay, it's still the okay. So we're getting back to the original story then. All right. Now. Okay, yeah.
But before we dive into the significance of those leaked photos and the leaked autopsy report, you need to understand a weird aspect of Brazil's history. Brazil has an absolutely astounding number of sightings of unidentified flying objects, or UFOs for short. And these are not your typical UFO stories where some person claims they saw aliens or they were abducted by aliens, but they have no witnesses, they have no proof, they have nothing but their own story. No, in Brazil, the bulk of their UFO sightings are reported by their military because Brazil actually has a government program to monitor UFO sightings because it happens so much in their country. In fact, the Brazilian government was directly involved in one of the most famous UFO sightings of all time. It was called the Night of the UFOs.
So I think also that Brazil has I'm pretty certain single most deadly UFO encounter ever recorded, I believe. Somebody fact check me on that. I'm pretty certain that it's Brazil. I'm fairly certain it is. Let's keep going.
This famous sighting, or sightings, because it actually happened in 4 different Brazilian states simultaneously, happened on May 19th, 1986, which was 2 years before Francisco spotted the dead body in the reservoir. On that 1986 day, at around 8:15 p.m., an air traffic controller at an international airport in Sao Paulo noticed 3 red lights hovering over the airport, and so the controller called it in and asked, what are these things? But nobody knew. And at the exact same time, all across Brazil, dozens and dozens of other people who have no idea what's happening at this international airport began reporting that they too were seeing strange lights in the sky. And many of these reports of these lights were coming from military personnel and government officials. And so this was like a really big deal that like all across Brazil, everybody's seeing lights in the sky. And so the government, in response to this, scrambled their fighter jets and sent the jets up to try to intercept one of these sets of lights, just to see who or what they were.
I'll just say, frickin' Chads. Frickin' Chads. Love it. Let's go.
And potentially shoot them down if they had to. But when these jets got anywhere close to these unidentified flying objects, these lights in the sky, these UFOs would move away like instantly. One UFO was observed suddenly disappearing and then reappearing 20 miles away in just 5 seconds, which meant that UFO had to travel at least 5 times the speed of sound to cover that distance in such a short amount of time. For reference, humans are not capable of going that fast. We cannot do that. Eventually,
but drones can. If we're able to build something with enough structural integrity, and it would probably most likely would have to maintain its own field of gravity somehow. It would have to maintain itself. It would have to have a very strong bond of some kind. Anyway, nerding out aside, in order to do that, drones can actually do that. If you were to make an SR-71 into a drone, it could go several times faster than anyone thought. And if you could build it to where it could maintain structural integrity over long durations of performance at that level, you're talking damn near magical stuff, right? Because if we were to go any faster than we do already inside of what we do it with, if we were to go too much faster or too quickly or too whatever, like we're just not built for it. We can't do it. We cannot do it. Anyway, let's keep going. What do you think? You let me know in the comments down below.
The night of the UFOs ended when all these UFOs, these lights in the sky, just kind of suddenly vanished. And then a couple of days later, the Brazilian government held this big press conference about the event, and they would say, we have no idea what those lights were or where they came from. We have no clue. However, whoever or whatever was controlling these UFOs showed obvious signs of intelligence. Now, as mind-blowing as that would be to hear that potentially intelligent creatures are flying around your airspace, remember, this is Brazil, where UFO sightings were kind of the norm, and so people were definitely shocked by this. This was a terrifying thing, but they just kind of accepted what they were told and assumed, the government will handle this, and people moved on with their lives. That is, until...
And look where that's gotten everybody nowadays. Oh, don't worry. The government will handle it. There's absolutely nothing at all wrong with the government handling it.
Several years later, in 1994, when those photos and the autopsy report of the dead person in the reservoir were leaked, and then suddenly the people of Brazil, they're seeing this stuff and they're realizing, wait a minute, the night of the UFOs may not have been an isolated instance. Those UFOs may never have left. Here is what the public learned from the leaked photos and the leaked autopsy report. Back in 1988, when little Francisco spotted the dead body from the other side of the water, he correctly identified that it was a man's body. But Francisco had been wrong when he told authorities that it didn't look like this guy had any visible injuries on him. And the guy was naked, and so Francisco felt pretty confident that he would have seen something if the guy was wounded. But when the police arrived and they saw the body up close, they immediately saw he had several very serious and very strange physical injuries. He had these 4 perfectly circular 1 to 1.5 inch diameter holes drilled into his body. There were 2 right above his chest, basically sitting above his armpit. There was one that was right over his belly button, so his belly button was gone. It was just a hole where it had been. And there was also one in his crotch. And these holes were not crudely done. These were done with surgical precision, almost like whoever had done it was using high-end medical tools to make these cuts. Now,
that's a common theme with a lot of this, isn't it? Intelligence, precision. It's almost like human beings are being captured and then experimented on by a higher life form. Kind of like what we do to ants or mice or fish or plants or basically anything and each other. How anyone is surprised that this is what would happen? How anyone is surprised, right? We're not special and neither is anything else. So the fact people think that some higher life form is going to be, that's above us, is going to see us the same way we see ourselves. They're going to see us like an animal, a very unique, strange, and different animal. And they're going to want to experiment on us and see what we're about and how we tick and what makes us function and work and blah, 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 right? We're no different from animals to them, most likely. Thus, the whole entire implication of higher life form. Let's go. Just like we are to pretty much all the rest of nature. The facts are the facts. You can't change them.
At first glance, the authorities had no idea why these holes were on this guy's body. But when the autopsy was done, they discovered this man was missing the majority of his internal organs, and after doing some investigating, they discovered that all of his organs had literally been vacuumed out of him through these holes on his body. Those holes were basically just ports to pull things out of him. Also, most of the man's blood had been suctioned out of those holes as well. But that wasn't all. The man also had one of his ears removed, one of his eyes was removed, and the lower part of his face was also removed. And again, all of these cuts looked like they had been made with absolute surgical precision. But perhaps the most brutal aspect of all the things that came to light when these documents were leaked was something that, unless you looked really closely at the autopsy report, you wouldn't necessarily notice. And it had to do with this man's vagus nerve. Your vagus nerve is something that controls part of your nervous system that's responsible for automatic functions like heart rate and digestion. And so when your body is suddenly
Is it vagus or Vegas? I think it's vagus. I think it's vagus nerve. I could be wrong though. Someone tell me about that in the comments.
in great distress, like suddenly you're fighting for your life or something, your vagus nerve can basically shut off those automatic functions like digestion in order to ensure all your energy is going towards fighting for your life. But in this dead man's case, his autopsy revealed that his vagus nerve had gone absolutely wild right at the moment of his death. It's complicated, but this suggests that this man was very likely alive when his face was being surgically cut off, and those holes were being drilled into his body, and his organs were being vacuumed out.
So most likely he was just paralyzed. All right. He was in some kind of paralysis. And then they basically gutted and surgically removed parts of him while he was still alive. That's what it sounds like. So it sounds like they applied some kind of paralytic, and definitely they didn't apply antiseptic or nothing, because I don't think the vagus nerve would be reacting that way if the case was otherwise. If they used antiseptic or whatever, it wouldn't activate at all. In fact, there would be no awareness if they did it correctly, which sounds like they could, right? A lot of people come back and they don't remember feeling anything at all. So it sounds like some kind of paralytic was involved instead of anesthetic. So basically all they did was like make it to where you can't move. And then they started doing what they wanted. I don't know about the rest of y'all, but this sounds quite terrifying, if I'll be honest. Something could just literally shut you off, but you feel everything, and they suck the organs out of you and remove pieces of your face and head while you're aware that it's happening, and you feel everything, every little thing. No, thank you. I don't know about the rest of y'all, but no, thank you.
And then at some point, the excruciating pain that came from these horrible things happening to him got so bad, his vagus nerve basically turned off his heart. So it was not these horrible physical injuries that killed him. He literally died from the pain of these physical injuries. In short, his body basically killed itself to avoid feeling the pain it was feeling.
Okay, so I was 100% right on that. I didn't even finish the rest. I thought he was done there. Oh, dude. Oh. And people think I'm insane and crazy for having like a bunch of guns and ammo and stuff, right? And possibly some other stuff that I won't get into. Anyway, what do y'all think though? Like I said, me personally, that's what it sounds like. Yeah, I'd want to just die instantly too. Because screw that. No, definitely not me. I don't want it to happen to me. Fuck, no, hell no. Great, I've got a new fear and phobia. Thanks, MrBallen. I hate it. Oh, shoot. All right, let's keep going.
So, I'm sure you're wondering, how does the dead man in the reservoir and these leaked photos and the autopsy report...
Quick snippet. Okay. Quick, fast little snippet. Again, why are people surprised? We do this to animals. Right? How do you think we've been experimenting on mice all these decades? Subjecting them to all the most horrific stuff possible. How do you think we've been, experimenting on each other over the decades? Same way. How do we experiment on lower life forms? Right? Same way. Bugs will rip the wings off insects to see what happens. So anyone being surprised this could happen to us from the hands of something else that's a higher life form than us, nobody should be surprised whatsoever. All right, off my soapbox.
How does all of that connect with the night of the UFOs, which happened 2 years before the man in the reservoir was even found? Well, following the night of the UFOs in 1986, farmers in Brazil who lived in the areas where these famous sightings took place began reporting that their cattle were dying kind of inexplicably. And this began happening with enough frequency in all of these areas where the UFO sightings had taken place that a theory began to develop in Brazil that maybe the UFOs that were here during the night of the UFOs have something to do with all these cows turning up dead. And as that theory began to take hold all across Brazil, that, UFOs are killing our cattle, another theory began to come out of that one, which was, well, if the UFOs are coming in here and killing cattle, what's stopping them from killing people? And then in 1988, so 2 years after the night of the UFOs,
Freaking facts. What is stopping them from killing people? No, seriously, what's stopping it? Does anybody have an answer to that? I can't think of one. These things can literally walk into people's houses. And there's literally nothing we can do about it. They have the ultimate God mode activated in comparison to us. Why more people are not freaking out about this, I have no idea. What do you think? Am I just crazy? Is that it? Is that all? Is that all there is to it? Am I just insane? Is that it? With my tinfoil hat, by the way, Operation Freedom Fighter on Facebook. Link is in the description box below, or it's a featured merch on the channel. Buy a hat. Buy a hat. Let's go.
and right in the middle of all these farmers all across Brazil saying their cows were dying for no reason, the dead man in the reservoir was discovered. And as soon as the government saw the physical condition this guy was in, with the weird holes drilled in his body and his organs missing and his face pulled off, that, plus the fact that he was located in this reservoir, which by the way was in a night of the UFO sighting area, the government decided they would have to hide the story. A critical detail that I have left out intentionally until right now is that the cattle who were turning up dead, they were turning up dead with circular holes drilled into their bodies, with organs missing and parts of their faces removed. Meaning, clearly, whatever was happening to these cattle inside of these sighting areas had happened to this man in the reservoir. And if that got out to the public, then it would confirm for many people in Brazil that, yep, the UFOs, they're the ones going after the cattle, and now they're going after us too. And so this was why the police were so secretive about the body and not letting anybody see it or learn anything about it. And it was also why no news was run anywhere in Brazil about the story. It's because
Okay, I think I'm ready to continue the rest of the video. Let's go.
the government was really trying to make sure it did not get out. And the government was able to keep it quiet until 1994 when those photos and the autopsy report were leaked. But like all things having to do with UFOs or aliens or paranormal stuff, it's like despite the evidence, those things very quickly are pushed into the kind of conspiracy theory bucket and they stay there. People do not want to touch that category. So, even though Brazil remains an absolute hotbed for UFO sightings, Wikipedia even has a page dedicated just to tracking Brazilian UFO sightings, despite all that, no one really cares. But if you care, there is an unbelievable amount of information online about what's going on in Brazil, and if nothing else, it is just a fascinating rabbit hole to fall into.
So, what do you think? Another reason to buy ammo and get armed? As if there wasn't enough already? There's literally, what, 8 billion reasons to have guns and ammo. One more. What's one more? What's one more? But I'm serious. I'm absolutely serious. Okay? Don't compromise your safety and security for nothing and nobody. Doesn't matter who it is. It's not worth it. All right? Your life is not worth that. So, yeah. But, yeah, like I said earlier, what's stopping them? From what I can tell, not shit. We're literally up against things that have Clark Tech. Look up what Clark Tech is. Okay? And then get back to me. We're up against that. Okay? They're real. Aliens are definitely real. Right? But they're actually technically extraterrestrial. Alien just means you're from another place or whatever. Anyway, so what do y'all think? Let me know in the comments down below. All right, you know what time it is. Be good, be safe, make a good life for yourselves. I'll see y'all in the next one. I am the Homeless Veteran. Please check out Operation Freedom Fighter on Facebook. Sometimes I game on twitch.tv/BadgerActual84. And I have fun on there, play games, and just do random crazy stuff, whatever I feel like, if I can, okay? That being said, buy some hats, please, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Badger 7 Actual, out.